Welcome to the Deep Dive. Every week we dig into the reporting from Addis Fortune to really understand the big economic and regulatory moves shaping Ethiopia. And we're not just, reading the headlines, we're trying to figure out what's really going on behind the scenes for you.
And this week, when you look at the source material, it's like watching two different worlds collide.
How so?
Well, on one hand, you have this incredible national ambition. We're talking about the largest airport in Africa, huge global trade goals.
Right.
But on the other, you have the messy, on-the-ground friction of actually getting things done at home. It's this constant push and pull between the big vision and the day-to-day reality.
That tension is absolutely the theme this week. So for our mission today, we're going to break down 4 key stories that show this perfectly. First, how they're trying to get the cash for this continental mega project.
Then the internal fight to get companies to actually follow the rules.
Exactly. And then just a wild cultural clash over taxes in a traditional market. And finally, we'll get into the turf wars between institutions that could threaten global trade.
It's a perfect snapshot of a country in a hurry. And I think to really get the scale of that ambition, we have to start with the infrastructure.
Okay, let's do it. The proposed new international airport near Bishoftu. The scale is, it's just staggering. We're talking $12.5 billion.
Yeah.
The goal is for it to be the biggest aviation gateway on the entire continent.
And that price tag, the $12.5 billion, that's the key thing to focus on for a second.
Okay.
For context, this single project is worth about, 8% of Ethiopia's entire GDP? So this isn't just expensive. You can't just fund this with, national savings or a simple loan. It needs a whole other level of financial thinking.
Which I guess brings us to that big meeting in Morocco at the African Investment Forum.
Exactly. In Rabat, this wasn't just a photo op. It was a real financial breakthrough. You had the finance minister, Ahmed Shady, and the Ethiopian Airlines CEO, Mesfin Tasso, and they walked away with a massive debt pledge.
Massive is the right word.
A huge one. 4 different financiers basically said, yes, we're ready to underwrite $4.8 billion in loans.
Wow.
Just think about that. In one meeting, they potentially secured nearly 40% of the entire project cost.
And the African Development Bank also chipped in $500 million. That's a huge signal of confidence, right?
A massive signal. This is now the AFDB's second largest infrastructure project in all of Africa. But let's step back from the numbers for a second and talk about why they even need this.
Right, because Bole International Airport is already pretty big.
It is, but it's a victim of its own success.
Yeah.
Ethiopian Airlines has just had this incredible decade of double-digit growth, and Bole is, he's hitting its limit. They need to build for the next 50 years.
And the vision, it's kind of breathtaking. They're planning for 100 million passengers a year.
100 million. So you're not building a national airport anymore.
No.
You're building a continental hub, something that plugs directly into other key infrastructure, like the Djibouti-Addis Railway.
So this kind of ambition, it forces new ways of thinking about money. You said it's not just a simple loan.
Not at all. The structure is the real story here. They're using something called blended financing.
Okay, break that down for us.
It's basically using public or sort of lower risk money to make the whole project feel safer. It de-risks it enough that big private investors feel comfortable coming in.
And what about this other term, securitization? That sounds like something straight out of Wall Street.
It kind of is, and it's really cutting edge for a project like this in Africa. Securitization means they're taking all the money they expect to make in the future.
So like passenger fees, cargo fees?
Exactly, landing charges, all of it. They bundle up all those future revenue streams and sell them today as a kind of investment product.
So you get the cash up front.
You get the cash up front. It brings in these huge institutional investors who just want a steady, predictable income for the next 20 years. It's smart. But it also puts enormous pressure on Ethiopian Airlines to deliver on that future promise.
Okay, so that's the massive external story getting the capital. Now let's pivot, because the internal story is all about the government's push to enforce compliance, and, well, it's causing some serious headaches.
It really is. And the biggest move is coming from the Accounting and Auditing Board of Ethiopia, the AABE. They're finally enforcing a law that's been on the books for a decade.
And the rule is basically, if you're a company and you want a loan, you need an AABE-approved financial statement first.
That's it. And they're doing it to solve the classic two sets of books problem.
Right, where a company tells the bank it's making a huge profit so it can get a loan.
And then turns around and tells the Ministry of Revenue it's bankrupt so it doesn't have to pay taxes.
It's a malpractice that it guts the whole system.
Completely. Both the tax system and the banking system. So now, if you're a bigger company, say with over 300 million birr in revenue, you need that official AABE stamp.
But the banks themselves are worried, right? The Ethiopian Bankers Association isn't worried about the law, but about AABE's ability to actually handle it.
That's the core anxiety. You have bankers like Kindi Mukuriya from Lion Bank saying, look, we always had to rely on collateral because the financial statements were just not trustworthy.
So they want this to work.
They do, but they're scared that AABE doesn't have the staff to process this sudden flood of paperwork. They're picturing this massive bureaucratic bottleneck where good businesses can't get credit.
But what does AABE say? I saw their acting director, Fikadu Agonifer, had a pretty simple counter-argument.
He did. He basically said, look, our job isn't to audit every single report. Our job is just to file it and stamp it. He said it takes 5 minutes.
So who carries the risk then?
The auditors. That's the key. AABE is shifting the responsibility. If an auditor signs off on a bad report, they could lose their license.
Which raises a really interesting question for you listening. Is just pushing the accountability down the chain to the auditors enough?
It's a big question. I mean, the whole domestic auditing industry is still maturing in Ethiopia. So you have to wonder if this is solving the problem or just creating a new one.
That's a great point. It's a system that suddenly relies on faith in a pretty young profession. And that clash between, a modern rule and the practical reality, it gets even more intense when we leave the corporate world and go to the Kara livestock market.
Oh, this story is incredible. This is where modern tax law just slams head-on into ancient tradition.
Set the scene for us. What's a deal at Kara normally like?
It's all about trust. It's sealed with a handshake, an elder's vow, cash is exchanged, the deal is done. It's worked that way for generations.
But now the federal tax agents are wading in. They have this huge 2 trillion birr budget to meet, and Ethiopia has one of the lowest tax-to-GDP ratios in Africa.
So they're desperate.
Yeah.
And the new rule they've come up with is, it's just mind-boggling in its detail.
Right, so if a butcher buys a bull without a printed receipt, which is basically always,
then the butcher has to become a tax agent on the spot. He needs the seller's full name, their address, the price, a photocopy of their ID.
A photocopy?
Or a screenshot, a signature, a bank transfer slip. It's insane. A.L. Saul from the Butchers Association just put it perfectly. He said, you can't find a photocopy machine, let alone draft contracts under the sun, while a bull tugs at its rope.
It sounds like a recipe for grinding the entire market to a halt.
The traders think it will. They say it'll strangle the supply chain. And a lot of sellers are just refusing to hand over their personal IDs. It feels like this deep violation of the way things are done.
But what's interesting is that the Butchers Association didn't just complain. They actually came up with a pretty clever workaround.
A very clever compromise. They said, look, we get that you need the tax money, so why don't you just fold it into the slaughterhouse service fee we already pay?
Which is collected by the Addis Ababa Abattoirs Enterprise.
Right. And that enterprise already has a digital database. So you could use their system to close the loophole and collect the tax at the processing stage.
And you get the transparency without needing photocopiers in a muddy field. It's a brilliant example of finding a modern fix that still respects the tradition.
Exactly.
Okay, so that same push for efficiency is happening in the big development goals too. But here, the plans are running into some serious trouble. Let's talk about the special economic zones.
The SEZs. The idea behind the proxy production scheme was import substitution. Get local companies making things Ethiopia usually has to buy from abroad.
A great idea on paper.
A great idea.
Yeah.
But the results are not great. The Ethiopian Investment Commission only hit 53% of its $400 million target in the first quarter. That's a 43% drop from last year.
That is a huge miss, especially because you hear that investor interest is really high. Something like 700 investors, over 500 new permits handed out. So what's the disconnect?
It comes down to follow-through and compliance. Federal lawmakers went to check, and what they found was pretty bad.
What they find?
Investors who got tax breaks to import machinery, but never even turned it on. Others who illegally rented out their subsidized production sheds to other people. Or they just failed to hire the number of people they promised.
So the interest is there to get the permit, but not necessarily to do the work.
Precisely. And as a consultant, Hannah Kasefa pointed out, import substitution isn't just about handing out permits. You need a stable environment to operate in. And the biggest things holding investors back haven't changed. Security problems, policy that keeps shifting, and, Ethiopia's terrible ranking in the ease of doing business reports.
You can sign up hundreds of investors, but if it's too hard to actually run the factory, they just won't.
Exactly. And that theme of execution being critical, we see it again with coffee exports and these new EU rules.
We're talking about the EU deforestation regulation, the EUDR. This was looming over the industry like a giant threat.
A huge threat. But they just got a reprieve. The EU has pushed the deadline back to December 2026 for big companies and June 2027 for smaller ones.
That is a massive gift of time for Ethiopia.
It really is, especially when nearly 40% of all their coffee last year went to the EU. The whole regulation is about traceability, proving your coffee wasn't grown on deforested land.
And the Ethiopian Coffee and Tea Authority, the ECTA, they've launched this new digital platform to handle it.
Yeah, the Ethiopian Coffee Traceability Management System. It's for mapping farms, collecting GPS coordinates, doing risk assessments, all the things you need for compliance.
And technically, they should be fine. ECTA's Director General said that 99% of Ethiopian coffee is grown in non-deforested areas anyway.
Right, but the problem isn't the farming, it's the logistics. The supply chain is incredibly fragmented. You can have beans from over 100 different smallholder farmers in a single shipping container.
Wow.
And the head of the Exporters Association, Kizat Worku, says those smallholders are really resistant to these new data requirements. They see it as intrusive. So the next couple of years have to be all about training and tech adoption at the farm level, or Ethiopia risks getting locked out of its biggest market.
So let's wrap this segment up with one last conflict. This one, an internal turf war over a new plant protection bill.
Yes, this is a classic bureaucratic battle. It pits the Environmental Protection Authority, the EPA, against the Ethiopian Agriculture Authority, the EAA.
And the EPA is basically saying this new bill from the EAA is stepping on its toes.
Stepping on its toes is putting it mildly. They're saying the draft bill copies their legal mandates on things like biosafety, GMOs, and invasive species, almost word for word.
And why should you, the listener, care about this?
Because it affects international agreements. The EPA is the one responsible for things like the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. If you blur the lines of accountability, you risk failing to comply.
The EAA, of course, says they're just modernizing things and they promise to work together.
Of course. But as one biotech researcher, Gizachuhale, pointed out, these two agencies are inseparable. You can't untangle them. The EPA checks for environmental safety. The EAA checks for production viability.
And if that turf war leads to weak inspections,
the consequences could be catastrophic. I mean, an improperly approved GMO, a new invasive species getting through. This bureaucratic fight has incredibly high stakes for the entire agricultural economy.
So we've gone from a $4.8 billion debt deal for an airport all the way down to demanding a photocopy of an ID for one cow at a market.
The whole spectrum. And the thread that connects every one of these stories is this aggressive push by Ethiopia to modernize its economy and its rules.
And that push is forcing these rapid and often pretty painful changes everywhere. A cultural shock at the Kara market, a new standard for financial honesty with the AEBE stamp,
and a total rethink of who does what between government agencies like the EPA and the EAA.
And the challenge, every single time, is moving from the big, ambitious plan like the $12 billion airport to the effective, non-disruptive execution on the ground.
That's it. Compliance, whether it's cultural or regulatory, is the single biggest hurdle to meeting these massive national goals.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to chew on. This whole push for transparency, whether it's through a complex financial document, an auditor's stamp, a cattle voucher, or a coffee traceability app, it's really disruptive.
It is. It forces people to abandon these old, comfortable systems that were built on trust and a handshake. But this painful, aggressive switch to verifiable, trustworthy data, it might be the only thing that determines whether Ethiopia's ambitions get built on a solid foundation or if they just remain a very, very expensive blueprint.
It's the price of admission to the modern global economy. And all these pain points we talked about today, that's just the sound of the country paying that price.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the economic and regulatory landscape reported by Addis Fortune.